Formula 1 classification times vary depending on the specific race. Today's classification time is determined by the start time and finish time of the session. The current classification follows the typical order of practice, qualifying, and race. This schedule is subject to change for special races. To ensure the safety of all drivers, this time must be adhered to strictly. This is done to ensure there is adequate time for setup, corrections, and repairs. The classification time for each race can be found in the official Formula 1 website prior to the race. This information will provide detailed information about the schedule and the times of each session. It is important to note that the schedule of the race is subject to change due to weather or other unforeseen circumstances. If this is the case, the classification time will be adjusted accordingly. The classification time is also subject to the availability of the teams, meaning that teams may have to adjust their schedule if they cannot participate due to circumstances beyond their control. The classification time for today's race should be available within 24 hours prior to the start of the session. This will give teams and drivers enough time to make any necessary adjustments to their setup and strategy. It is also important to note that teams and drivers must be present at the designated classification time. If they are not present, their time will be forfeited and they will not be able to participate in the race. In some cases, teams may be allowed to reschedule their classification time. This is done if the team is experiencing technical difficulties or is unable to attend a session due to unforeseen circumstances. Formula 1 has strict guidelines in place to ensure fairness and safety. All teams and drivers must abide by these regulations to ensure the integrity of the sport. The classification time for today's race will be announced on the day preceding the race. This will then allow all the teams and drivers to plan accordingly and make the necessary preparations for the session. For teams that are late or unable to attend the session, they will have to adhere to a set of penalties including fines and disqualification if they do not meet the required time. To ensure a level playing field, all drivers will have to pass a weight inspection before being allowed on the track. This will ensure that all cars are running at the same speed. The teams and drivers must also adhere to the regulations put in place by the series to ensure fairness and safety during the race. All of these factors will come into play during the classification period. The classification period will usually take place over several days and will be the first indication of the performance of each team and driver. This will give teams and drivers an advantage when it comes to strategy and preparation. During the classification period, teams will adjust their cars and strategy based on the results of the previous days. This is done to try to gain an advantage over the other teams. Teams and drivers must adhere to the rules set out by the governing body of the sport. If they do not abide by it, they will be subject to sanctions by the FIA. To ensure that all teams and drivers have an equal chance of success, the FIA will distribute points based on the results of the classification period. After the classification period, the drivers will then proceed to the starting grid where they will line up in order of the fastest times recorded during the classification. The rest of the race will depend on the performance of the teams and drivers, and the strategies they devise in order to gain an edge over their opponents. The classification period is a crucial part of Formula One and must be taken seriously, as it can dictate the success or failure of a team and driver. It is important that teams and drivers are fully prepared for the task ahead, and ensure that they are fully aware of the rules and regulations before entering the track. Teams and drivers are expected to remain courteous and professional during the classification period. This is done to ensure that all drivers are afforded a fair and equal chance to compete. The pressure of the classification period can be intense, but it is important to remain focused and take it one step at a time. Drivers must remember that the main goal of the classification period is to set the best possible time, and to remain focused on that goal.